Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith, and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On this week's podcast, we are going to continue our conversation about critical race theory and its impact on our judicial system. Joining me back on the podcast today is PJTN Senior Academic Fellow, Dr. Sandra Alfonsi, to help inform our audience about this threat to our children and our republic. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome back to our program, Proclaiming Justice, Dr. Sandra Alfonsi. Dr. Alfonsi, welcome, and it's great to have you back.
It's great to be back. Thank you for inviting me, Laurie.
Absolutely. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we thought this was going to be a 3-part series. This may end up going into 4 or 5 or 6 parts. There's so much information here, and this is foundational information. We have to understand where critical race theory originated and the damage that is being done and who is behind this, who's promoting this. This is a threat to our republic, and we as Americans must engage. And the only way we can engage in this battle is if we have the facts. We have to know what is going on. So I'm honored to have Dr. Alfonsi back with us again. Dr. Alfonsi, you know, we've talked about, you know, this dangerous trend that we're witnessing, watching the universities, the law schools across this country. And I can think of several right off the top, but even law schools like at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, which is one of the strongest constitutionally in the country and is well respected. But with the direction that we're headed, universities like even Belmont, their law school can even become part of the focus of the attack to shut them down and force them, if they want their students to be able to become members of the American Bar Association. How are they going to address these issues? Because, you know, we're going to talk more about the involvement of the American Bar Association, because now they are requiring all accredited law schools to provide education to law students on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. This is, I mean, you just can't make this up. We're already indoctrinating the law schools. That's in addition to a mandatory legal ethics class, which must now instruct students that they have a duty as lawyers to eliminate racism. And we know that the American Bar Association voted 348 to 17 to adopt this new standard. What are we looking at? I mean, you know, it's as if these trial verdicts, we know that these trial verdicts do not align with the new politics. Are we going to, you know, because it'll be seen as hate and illegitimate legal order, are we getting ready to witness the destruction of our judicial system with our future law students, graduates?
If it continues this way, Laurie, I will answer your question affirmatively with yes. What has happened is that the the American Bar Association has become the weapon of choice. It has, it's beyond bullying. It has the way in which to mandate what may be taught and not be taught. And they are behind the dismantling of our government because they are promoting the question and posing the question, if anyone now, is there any student now who does not support the dismantling of the Constitution? So the answer is yes. And the American Bar Association is the weapon of choice because, first of all, it has an aura about it.
Right.
It has the people who run it are very highly schooled, and therefore they are the word on everything. And my feeling is that the answer is yes, and what we can do about it, there, it's going to take really an academic revolution, and we have to use the word, we have to use that word. We have to have lawyers who are prepared to battle to remove tenure from tenured professors who are teaching critical race. All of this, and it cannot trickle down because what we're doing on the K through 12 level is one thing. There could be an American Bar Association mandating if the plan were not already functioning on K through 12 and 4 years undergraduate. And I do think that that's what's going on.
So let's look at an example at UC Irvine. The university's chief diversity officer emailed students that the acquittal, quote, conveys a chilling message: neither Black lives nor those of their lives matter. Now, law professors are increasingly fearful and self-censor their thoughts and even facial expressions for fear that it will be disseminated on the internet around the globe. So now the intimidation factor is also an issue that these future law students who are going to go out into the world and judge and rule and represent we the people. I mean, they're even now self-regulating themselves.
But we have to remember something also, Lori, that the age of the professors who still have a good portion of their career left and the age of the students, they have already been indoctrinated and intimidated from before junior high school, because it's serious enough that intimidation and indoctrination is starting in elementary school, and they have managed to skirt around it, but they will not, because they are accustomed to doing what they must do in order to keep their job. But before, it was a question of doing what they must do in order to do that. They learned, they were intimidated, they were bullied, all of this. And what they learned, you want your grade, you do this, doesn't matter what you think. And there's there's a very small line between it doesn't matter what you think to then becoming a person who said, okay, if I want to work, I have to go ahead and support this. And that's what they do.
Well, here's another example. Even Yale Law School, which we all know was once a prestigious university, the Office of Student Affairs provides critical race theory T-shirts to students. And the T-shirt states, quote, reparations and prison abolition. Critical race theory, that's critical race theory and Yale Law School. So now they're getting into this with these T-shirts with slogans, and they're manipulating and causing these kids, these future, these law students, these future lawyers, attorneys in America. And so they're even using T-shirts to intimidate. And then we have the University of Illinois in Chicago. Here's another example. A law professor's classes were canceled and his career threatened for including a bleeped out N-word on an exam in a hypothetical scenario about employment discrimination. Now, this is another intimidating factor. You talked about attorneys challenging the tenure of these professors. Will these attorneys even take on these professors? Do we have, you know, this has been going on for such a long time. Do we have attorneys that would be willing to risk their careers? Because that's what it's coming down to.
They would have, I'll put it in that tense. However, the law firms are making it very clear exactly whom they may defend and what they may defend and whom they may not defend. So the answer is when there are cases where
Mhm.
professors and others have come to find representation of the violation of their rights, and the answer was no, we do not represent anyone from the right. We do not represent anyone who maintains anything that is opposite what we profess, and that's what the critical race, etc. So
Mhm.
will there be a deficit? Yes.
Mhm.
Will are there might see what I believe, but it doesn't do any good. What I believe is that there are those who would combat this in the legal field. There are those who would do an academic revolution, but there's no forum, there's no
Mhm.
stage for them to do it. And so it it isn't that they acquiesce and support, it's that there is no means for them to come out and fight.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
even Alan Dershowitz reported that he could not find legal representation. He had a
Mm.
hard time.
Wow. Well, there's another example. And again, this is coming, ladies and gentlemen, I'm taking these examples from an article written by Aaron Sabarium, and it's called The Takeover of America's Legal System. I encourage you to go online and find the article, read the article. But Dr. Alfonsi, there's another example at Boston College Law School this semester. A constitutional law professor asked students, quote, who does not think we should scrap the Constitution, close quote. According to a student in the class, not a single person raised their hand. Now let me read the quote again. This constitutional law professor asked his students, who does not think we should scrap the Constitution? Nobody raised their hand. This is the damage that has already been done. This is just one example in one university, one law school. This is frightening.
But we're looking at, and this is what I want your listeners and your followers to understand, and the parents to understand, that we gave away the entire country. We gave away the education system by not watching. And as parents who were worried about the future of their children, most parents backed their child's decision not to come forward. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are looking at the product, because not only the young people in law school, I have a feeling that, as many years as I've been doing this, that the parents of these young attorneys, or who was in law school, they also came up under the "don't make waves," and
Mm-hmm.
it'll be okay when you get out. Well, there is no okay when you get out if the job market reflects that ideology. It'll never be okay. You can't tell your child, you can't tell your students and anyone, just play along right now, because as soon as you graduate, you're an adult, you'll be on your own, you'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to follow your own morality, etc. That's like pie in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen. They First of all, the youngsters, the young people have been indoctrinated. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know
Right.
and they also have been intimidated. So
Mm-hmm.
whether one way or the other, they are either afraid, or they have been indoctrinated whereby what is wrong doesn't appear wrong to them. That's the
Mm-hmm.
danger. The danger,
Right.
you put an end to the bullying, but once they're indoctrinated not to know right from wrong,
Mm-hmm.
not to understand it or see it, or feel it. And the fact that critical race theory is so dangerous because it plays with language. And
Hmm.
regardless of the socioeconomic level of our students, Lori, our American students are not well versed in the English language, even when
Right.
they come to high school, they go into college. So
Hmm.
therefore, they are not prepared to, as we used to, and I called it when I taught literature, you have to learn how to read between the lines because that's where the truth lies.
Right.
They are poorly equipped linguistically, and
Hmm.
CRT is a master of linguistic deception.
Hmm. That's a great point, Dr. Alfonsi. There's another example I want to share with you. Again, law school or Yale Law School. Um, there was a there was an event that happened when the school. Here's when the school's chapter of the Federalist Society. Now we all know the Federalist Society, and it's a respected organization. But they hosted a bipartisan panel on civil liberties. They had 100 law students disrupt the event. They were intimidating attendees and attempting to drown out the speakers that were on the panel. When the professor moderating the panel, Katie Stith, told the protesters to grow up, that's her quote, they hurled abuse at her and insisted their disturbance was free speech. So we've seen examples of this on universities, typically with the whole Arab-Israeli conflict, where speakers get shouted down. Now, if an organization like the Federalist Society comes on campus to speak about our Constitution, the students at Yale Law School are going to shout down the speakers and try to silence them. They are trying to intimidate and silence the truth about our country, our republic form of government. And they're violating the rights and the freedoms of other students to be able to engage in this conversation.
Well, I'd like to add one thing, which is not very erudite, but this is also a power play on the part of those who are doing the disrupting, because what the young people see is that those who exert force are the ones who get ahead. Those
Mm-hmm.
who exert force are not punishable. And so it becomes power rests in the ability to put someone else down. And freedom of speech is not interpreted the way we understand it. It means, if it were, I would say, okay, that is freedom of speech. You have your right to say your opinion. I
Right.
have the right to my, but that's not what they interpreted. They're free to use the force by which they silence. And that's
Mm-hmm.
power. That is big
Mm-hmm.
power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, we're seeing this in the law schools, but even in the business world, even with the current administration. For example, NASDAQ last year demanded that companies listing shares on its exchanges have to meet these racial and gender quotas. And of course, Uber and Postmates waived their delivery fees from Black-owned restaurants. We had Montana and Vermont gave non-white residents priority access to COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, we are discriminating against people who are white, who are not of color. This is outrageous. This flies in the face, again, of what Martin Luther King tried to preach and teach, that we should not base what we believe about people or think about people based on the color of their skin, but on their integrity as who they are as individuals, as human beings. But we're not doing that. Now we've got even big business. We know that the Biden administration, he's been involved in initiatives trying to block and stand in the way of attempts to prioritize minority-owned restaurants while doling out pandemic relief. But the legal guardrails that once ensured against this sort of tipping of the scales are coming undone. This is, Now we have the president. So we've got law schools, we've got big business engaged in this. We have the Biden administration who is pushing this. We know that the Biden administration is pushing it through the curriculum with critical race theory. It's one of the reasons why we have been adamant about cutting education funding from our state departments of education because of the influence of the federal government and how they are rewriting America's history. They are intimidating our children. And where do you see this going, Dr. Alfonsi? Are we going to be able to overcome this? Because it's taking over every aspect of our lives and people are being intimidated into silence.
Well, whether we'll be able to overcome it, I really don't know. I'm not a prophet or an oracle, Lord, but what I see, it would be the only solution would be to have an academic revolution. That is to say that leaders of every profession, the leaders of every type of a business, that they stand firm. What we've done with CRT and Black Lives Matter, but especially with CRT, is we have redefined the word racism, and by redefining it, we put the onus onto those onto the whites, and therefore all the rights go to the minorities. Now, the minorities are defined only as people of color, and there are people of color excluded from that. And unless inside of academia, the only way this would be is to be able to. Now you can't go to the American Bar Association and the Department of Education, but we would have to take tenure away. There are things that can be done. It would be a revolution unlike any ever seen, because people know revolution to be bloodshed.
Mm-hmm.
That
Right.
we have never faced an intellectual revolution. We've never faced it inside of education, inside the schools, inside that. And then the business is, people don't want to look at what's in front of them, because those who are the leaders of business are not, if they are minority people of color, they are well educated, they are well heeled, as we used to say. They have money, they have the education, they have the house, they have the car, they have everything. But we don't like to see it. We don't say it. And therefore, what the examples with giving the breaks to the minority businesses, not at the expense. It should be, if there are breaks, it's for the businesses. And
Right.
the scandal with the vaccinations, it's but this is a terrible. I don't have a better word, but this is a deplorable game.
Mm-hmm.
These self-righteous hypocrites, they are revolutionaries, they are bloodletters, and they are probably the most corrupt in their actions. More important than that, they are probably the most morally corrupt leaders of every echelon of our society. Now, it takes a lot to recognize it, not be afraid to say it, and it will call for a tremendous alliance between blacks and whites and the other varieties of color. I'm not laughing. I don't, we say blacks and white. It will take an alliance to put this country back together, because those who must be punished are both the whites and the blacks. But the ones most, in my mind, reading all this and what I'm learning about it, they are the worst perpetrators of racism themselves, because they are taking the American blacks and they are manipulating them, and they are re-ghettoizing them in such a way that they are splitting the society, which was living together basically well, and that it's going to be very difficult to get Black Americans and white Americans to stand next to each other and to put the country back together with all the problems that it has. So that's how I see it. And
Hmm.
my anger is twofold. First of all, that people were not watching, and the people who
Hmm.
were watching were the ones that are perpetrating all of this. But the rest of the Americans, we were so lulled into the idea that America is the greatest nation in the world, the most powerful nation, the richest nation. We lost our perspective of what it
Right.
means to be a moral, ethical nation.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's how I see this, and
Abs-
how we get it back. I can't say it's up to God. It's up to man, because he created man supposedly in his image.
hmm That's right. It is up to us. And if we will do the task of getting to work to reverse the trend in our country, to bring back justice and righteousness, ladies and gentlemen, then God will meet us in our work. But we've got to show him that we care enough to get engaged. You know, you mentioned Alan Dershowitz, Dr. Alfonsi, previously. I want to just share a quote with our audience. Alan Dershowitz, whom we all know and respect as a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, he, when he was doing this interview with Aaron Sabarius, he said, when asked about this problem, he said it's much worse than McCarthyism. This is his quote. He said McCarthyism was a reflection of dying old views. They were not the future, but the people today are imposing litmus tests for who they represent. They are the future. And Aaron Sabarius used the example of what happened to Dershowitz when he was accused in 2014 of sexual relations with an underage girl at Jeffrey Epstein's various residences. And he said he had trouble finding representation. Of course, we know that a federal judge eventually struck down the allegations from the record, but law firms have been known to avoid unpopular clients. We remember back Big Tobacco was a great example. But the scope and frequency of these evasions have increased. Dozens of lawyers now who were interviewed for this story agreed. And that's partly because young lawyers, like the one who accosted David Boies, see representing someone as tantamount to endorsing them. Wow. That totally flips on its head what we believe about our judicial system, or what we have been taught and what we've always known.
Well, it undermines just one, not just meaning the only one, just one concept of innocent until proven guilty. If you don't find representation, it means ergo, therefore, it means the person is guilty, and I will not sully my hands, and I won't get involved, because getting
Hmm.
involved means put the truth forward, and they cannot afford to put the truth forward.
Yep. No, absolutely not. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to conclude and wrap up this show for this week, but we are going to come back. There's so much more that we need to share with you, examples, repeated examples of these offenses, and why it is so critically important that we take back local control of our communities, our school boards, our local governments, our state legislatures. This is an election year. And if we do not speak up with our vote and make sure that we're sitting at the polls, watching and observing the polls so that elections are not rigged or stolen, it's up to us, ladies and gentlemen. The cavalry is not coming. We are it. Dr. Alfonsi, I want to thank you again, and I'm looking forward to our next interview as we continue this conversation about the impact of critical race theory on our law schools across this country.
One thing, Lori, that the language which we need to go, we'll do next week, I want people to hear exactly what the American Bar Association has put out in writing concerning the critical race theory, and what they say it is and what they say it is not. And I will give that to them next week. But it's imperative, because if this is the language of the American Bar Association, we have a tremendous battle to wage with them as well as with the theorists themselves.
Absolutely. 340, what was it? 348 to 17 voted in favor of this. This is outrageous. Dr. Alfonsi, thank you so much again for joining us. You are amazing, ladies and gentlemen. You can find more about Dr. Alfonsi at our website on pjtn.org. We've got her articles there on the website. Please take the time to go and read what she's written on this and so many other issues. We are honored and grateful to have her on our PJTN team. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to go to our website, as I said, to learn more about how you can take back local control of your children's education, because ultimately, as we've said, it starts with you. If you are interested in hosting a summit in your community to help educate, motivate, and activate your county to flip your school board, now is the time to do it. This is an election year, and now is the time to act. And you may be listening to this, and your school board elections may be over, or you're in the middle of them. The information that you're going to hear is important, it's invaluable, and it can be used. That's why these summits are so important. You can use what you learn, the strategies that we have put in place, to do it next time, next election cycle. These elections typically go every 2 years for school board. And this is where we need to flip the mindset, because these teachers, these school boards, these superintendents, the Department of Education, the NEA, the National School Board Association, they have control of our children's minds. The majority of children are in the system. They are in the public school system. And the only way that we are going to reverse this is if we engage and we start breathing down their necks to let them know we are not going away. We will not keep silent. And we're going to post this podcast on our website and with all of our podcast platforms. But we need for you to share this information with your family and friends. You've got to help us get this information out to people. We have to educate people. And that's where your role comes in. As a PJTM watchman, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and threatening our Judeo-Christian values. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. And we all know if the watchman sees the enemy advancing and we do not stand up and warn the inhabitants of the city, then if any blood is shed, it's going to be required of us. But if we do warn the people and they don't want to listen and their blood is shed, it's going to be required of them. So as a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil, because God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education by taking on critical race theory. I also want to remind you that if you have not signed up to become a watchman with PJTN, you can help support this effort and more programs just like this one for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. So I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing word. And I want to leave you with a sobering statement by Samuel Adams. He said, "If ever a time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." What a sobering statement, and so relevant even for today. That was Samuel Adams, ladies and gentlemen. Our founding fathers understood the threat that we are facing today. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless you. Thank you so much for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. We'll see you next week. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.